Good evening, friends, and welcome to the Sleepless Library, where we explore the world's greatest stories to help you drift into the deepest sleep. Tonight we are summarizing East of Eden, John Steinbeck's sweeping American epic of family, betrayal, love, and the timeless battle between good and evil. Before you wind down, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And if you have a favourite book you would like us to summarize, let us know in the comments. Okay, get comfortable. Dim the lights as we drift into tonight's story. East of Eden by John Steinbeck. The Salinas Valley in Northern California stretched between two mountain ranges. The light, golden Gabilans to the east and the dark, heavy Santa Lucias to the west. The land was beautiful but harsh, and the people who lived there were shaped by its unpredictability. In the dry months, the Salinas River dwindled to a trickle, but when the rains came, it could flood with power. Families prayed for rain and cursed it when it came too much. The valley had seen generations come and go, teaching its residents to be patient and resilient. Memories of the place clung to the senses: grasses, bird song, the scent of trees and people. The light from the east brought a feeling of hope and comfort, while the looming mountains to the west carried unease and danger. People settled where they could, often without knowing whether their land would prosper. Some were lucky, others weren't. In this wide, unforgiving valley, life took root in different ways. The land didn't promise success, but it demanded character. Those who stayed learned to read the sky and feel the wind, to expect little and work hard. Their stories would unfold across the valley's fields, through seasons of struggle and moments of grace. Samuel Hamilton, an Irish immigrant, settled in the dry part of the Salinas Valley with his wife Liza. Though the land was barren and difficult to farm, Samuel was cheerful, clever, and full of energy. He built his home from scratch and raised 9 children there. His inventions were creative, but they never made him rich. Neighbours respected him for his honesty and sought his advice on everything from machinery to life problems. Liza was stern, deeply religious, and believed strongly in right and wrong. She ruled the household with quiet authority, insisting on structure and discipline. Despite her strictness, she was devoted and dependable, managing the large household while Samuel handled the land and community. While wealthier settlers thrived on more fertile land, Samuel remained poor, having refused to cheat during land testing like others did. Yet he became a central figure in the community because of his fairness and good humour. His home was always full of conversation, ideas and visitors, drawn by his wit and warmth. As the family grew, so did Samuel's influence in the valley. Though his children would eventually go their own ways, the Hamiltons became woven into the fabric of Salinas life. Adam Trask was born on a farm in Connecticut in the years after the Civil War. His father, Cyrus Trask, had been wounded early in the war and returned home with a wooden leg and a burning desire to be seen as a military expert. Though he'd only served briefly, Cyrus built his reputation through obsessive reading and storytelling, convincing everyone, including his sons, that he was a seasoned authority on war. Adam was gentle, quiet, and obedient. His half-brother Charles was rougher, stronger, and driven by a constant need to win his father's favour. The boys grew up in a household where Cyrus's booming presence and fierce discipline shaped everything. Charles, despite his hard work and devotion, felt that Adam was the favoured son, and that suspicion simmered into resentment. One night, after Adam was praised over him, Charles attacked his brother with terrifying violence. Adam was badly beaten and had to recover under Cyrus's care. Cyrus, either unaware or deliberately silent about what happened, did not punish Charles. The rift between the brothers never fully healed, and Charles's jealousy would remain a defining force in their relationship. Cyrus's obsession with legacy extended beyond storytelling. He sent Adam to join the military, hoping it would toughen him and bring honour. Adam, reluctant but obedient, enlisted and served his time, drifting through assignments with no particular passion for soldiering. When his service ended, he wandered aimlessly across the country for years, living like a drifter, always avoiding home. Charles stayed on the farm, growing bitter in Adam's absence. Meanwhile, Cyrus had become wealthy and moved to Washington, D.C., claiming a post on a military advisory board. The source of his wealth was suspicious and unexplained, but the boys inherited it when he died, leaving them both rich and deeply unsettled. Charles stood in the village inn, laughing and buying drinks for a group of travelling salesmen. His hands were bruised from a fight, split knuckles that stung but made him grin. He loved the attention, the camaraderie, and the thrill of reckless mischief. But when Cyrus Truss came looking for him that night, he was furious. Something dark had taken hold of him. If he had found Charles right then, he might have killed him. The rage didn't pass easily. Word got back to Charles that his father was hunting him with a shotgun. Charles disappeared for 2 weeks. When he finally returned, murder had faded to resentment, and Cyrus punished him the way he knew best, with hard labour and a cold, theatrical forgiveness. Meanwhile, Adam was bedridden for days, bruised and aching. His body throbbed with pain from the beating Charles had given him, and Cyrus's solution was to mask the shame with spectacle. On the 3rd day, he pulled strings with his military contacts and arranged for a small troop of cavalrymen to visit Adam's bedside. A captain and 2 sergeants marched into the room in full-dress blues. Outside, their horses waited, held by 2 privates. The visit was as much for Cyrus as it was for Adam. It was a statement, a display of power, a balm for wounded pride, and a kind of reward for Adam's suffering. Adam lay there stunned as the officer saluted him and made small talk, pretending the visit was ceremonial, not political. For Charles, it only deepened the divide. He knew the attention, the drama, the gift of uniformed visitors. It was all for Adam, always Adam, the favoured son, the chosen one. Bitterness began to root itself in Charles, and deep down both boys knew the balance of their father's love would never be equal. On the Hamilton ranch, the children began to grow, each one unique in character and temperament. George, the eldest, was tall, handsome, and unfailingly polite. From a young age he carried himself with a quiet dignity that made him easy to admire and hard to criticize. He never caused trouble, never raised his voice, and somehow always seemed neatly dressed, even in old clothes. People would later say he was sinless, not because he was perfect, but because he lacked the energy for rebellion. In middle age he was diagnosed with pernicious anemia, and some wondered if his virtue had been more exhaustion than morality. Behind George came Will, short and solid, with little imagination but an abundance of drive. From childhood he worked hard so long as someone told him what to do. Once directed, he was tireless. Will craved order and predictability. New ideas unsettled him. Change was not a challenge, it was a threat. He lived cautiously, trying to blend in and avoid judgment. If George floated above life, Will pressed into it with both feet firmly planted. Their father, Samuel, influenced them in ways they didn't always recognize. Will, especially, reacted against Samuel's eccentricities. Samuel was still considered an outsider in the Salinas Valley, a foreigner, an Irishman, and a man of too many ideas. The prejudice against the Irish, particularly strong in the East, had bled into the West, and Will absorbed that tension. His father's inventions, his wild stories, his laughter, all made Will uncomfortable. Will didn't want to be laughed at. he wanted to be accepted. The children of the Hamiltons were growing up under a roof of contradictions, the charm of Samuel, the steadiness of their mother Lisa, and the pull of a world that both admired and distrusted difference. And even in their youth, the path each child would take was already starting to unfold. After Adam joined the army and Cyrus moved to Washington, Charles stayed behind, alone on the family farm. Outwardly, he joked about finding himself a wife. But the truth was, Charles was painfully shy around women. Like many timid men, he dealt with his desires in secret, through visits to prostitutes. It was simpler that way. No rejection, no awkward conversation, just an exchange, money for silence. In the nearby village inn, a discreet system had been set up. The top floor held 3 rooms, rotated every 2 weeks by a different group of girls. They came quietly, stayed out of sight, and left before anyone noticed. Meals were delivered. No noise, no drinking, no falling in love. Those were the rules, strictly enforced by a man named Edwards, a whoremaster based in Boston. His business model was efficient and discreet. The girls moved from town to town like travelling salesmen, all was gone before the locals got curious. Charles found comfort in this arrangement. It let him feel powerful without having to be vulnerable. But it didn't solve the deeper issue, that he didn't know how to truly connect with people, especially women. He was alone, and he felt it. Meanwhile, Adam's time in the army shaped him in quieter ways. He didn't love the military, but he adapted to its rhythms. The uniform fit him better than the life back home ever had. And as the years passed, the 2 brothers drifted further apart, not through conflict, but through the quiet widening of their separate lives. Back on the farm, Charles kept everything running. He planted, harvested, and repaired tools. But something hollow lingered beneath the routine. The house was too quiet, the land too still, and Charles, despite his strength and pride, was starting to understand the cost of solitude. Some people are born with physical deformities, missing limbs, malformed bodies. But what if a person were born with a damaged soul, without conscience, without compassion? That's how Kathy Ames entered the world. From the very beginning, something in her was off, something deep and unfixable. She didn't seem to feel guilt or love, not even fear in the way most people do. And she didn't struggle with it. She simply accepted her difference and used it. As a child, Kathy was clever, quiet, and unsettlingly calm. She watched people closely, learning how to mimic emotion and innocence. Her teachers thought she was gifted, neighbours found her polite, but underneath it all was a terrifying emptiness, an ability to lie without flinching, to manipulate without remorse. At 10, she began to understand the power of her appearance. She was lovely, with golden curls and soft eyes that master cold calculations. She used that to her advantage. In school she lied about being attacked by boys, crying and trembling in just the right way to convince everyone. The boys were expelled. Kathy never looked back. By 16 she was leading a secret life. She seduced a teacher, then pretended to be ashamed. She stole from her parents, manipulated boys, and crafted lies so convincing even she seemed to believe them. But Kathy didn't want small power. She wanted full control. She took pleasure in ruining people, in creating pain and watching the fallout. She set fire to her parents' home and made sure they didn't survive. She left town with their money and no intention of mourning. To the outside world, Kathy Ames looked like a victim or a confused girl, but inside she was something else entirely. Not angry, not hurt, just hollow and dangerous. Mr. Edwards ran his business like a banker, precise, unemotional, and highly profitable. He was a whoremaster with a well-kept home in Boston, a tidy, dust-free house, a proper wife, and 2 sons already enrolled at Groton. His double life was well balanced. Evenings spent at home, days spent managing a discreet network of girls across small New England towns. He had created a system that worked. His girls stayed only briefly in each location, ensuring curiosity never turned to suspicion. Small-town sheriffs were easy to manage, and he avoided cities where the police demanded too much. His ideal market was a lonely, entertainment-starved village, with one tired hotel and few distractions. At the time of this story, Mr. Edwards had 10 such units operating. By the time he choked to death on a chicken bone in his 60s, he had expanded to 33 towns, and he died rich. His success, like his death, was blunt and symbolic. When Kathy Ames arrived in Mr. Edwards' orbit, she was just another girl in need of management. But something about her unnerved him. She was beautiful, of course, but it wasn't that. There was something hollow behind her eyes, something calculating and unreadable, and still he kept her. At first he believed she needed protection, that he could save her or mould her. Kathy let him believe that. She played her part, coiled in softness and flattery. But when he fell for her, truly fell, Kathy's power became dangerous. He began to hate her for making him feel vulnerable. The line between desire and disgust blurred. One day he beat her brutally, dragging her out of his house and leaving her for dead in a ditch. Kathy didn't scream or beg. She didn't even look afraid. She simply endured, quietly storing the experience as another scar she would never show. Bruised and bleeding, she crawled away from the roadside, alone but not broken. Kathy had always known how to survive. After Adam left the army, he returned to the family farm where Charles still lived. The 2 brothers resumed life under the same roof, but their relationship had grown more distant. The long years apart had carved a subtle rift between them, and though they weren't openly hostile, a quiet discomfort settled in the house. There was no easy familiarity, only a cautious politeness wrapped around unspoken tension. The death of their father and the mysterious inheritance he left behind added to the unease. The money seemed to have no clear origin. There were no documents or explanations, just wealth, clean and unexplained. Adam was inclined to accept it, while Charles harboured a deep, persistent suspicion. He couldn't understand how a man like Cyrus, with no visible means of fortune, could have left behind such a sizable sum. Despite their differences, they found a way to coexist. Charles was rigid in his habits, keeping a strict routine on the farm that offered him a sense of control. Adam, less structured, followed along and tried not to disrupt the rhythm. The work got done, and the days passed quietly. The house itself carried an air of staleness. The conversation was minimal. Meals were eaten without much talk, and evenings were spent in separate silences. They worked side by side during the day, yet the distance between them only seemed to grow. The weight of the money hung over them like a shadow, its presence undeniable, its origin unspoken. Charles felt the burden of it in his bones. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were living off something that wasn't entirely honest. Adam, more passive by nature, seemed willing to let it rest. But in Charles's mind, the mystery of their father's legacy remained a quiet, gnawing wound. After returning home, Adam and Charles settled into an uneasy routine. The tension that had always existed between them softened slightly with time, especially as Charles began to see Adam less as a rival and more as a fellow man shaped by hardship. Adam's wandering years and time in prison gave him a groundedness that Charles hadn't expected, and their shared solitude on the farm gradually became bearable. One evening, their quiet life was interrupted. A woman appeared on the front steps, crawling and severely injured. Her face was swollen, her clothes torn and bloodied, and her body bore the signs of a brutal beating. She had managed to drag herself to their porch before collapsing from exhaustion. The brothers were stunned by the sight of her. Adam immediately took action, lifting her into the house and placing her in his bed. Charles hesitated, unsure whether they should intervene further, but he did not stop Adam from helping her. The woman was unconscious and barely alive, her condition requiring urgent care. They summoned a doctor who examined her and confirmed the severity of her injuries. It was clear she had been through something horrific. Her presence marked a turning point in the household. Without a name or a past, she brought an air of mystery and quiet danger into their lives. For Adam, she became a symbol of purpose, someone to protect and possibly redeem. For Charles, she was a source of unease, an unpredictable element in an otherwise controlled world. Whatever their initial reactions, the woman was now part of their lives. The house that had once been silent and predictable had shifted. Something new, and possibly dangerous, had entered their world. As the century turned, a quiet transformation moved through the land. The world that had once felt simple and full of meaning began to blur. People aged and remembered the past not for what it truly was, but for how it had felt, softer, easier, full of small pleasures and fewer burdens. The innocence of youth seemed distant now, lost behind the clutter of time and change. What had once been thrilling or painful now remained only as echoes, memories without detail, emotions faded by time. There had been days when boys threw themselves into the grass, overwhelmed by life, pounding the ground with fists, overtaken by feeling too big for their bodies. Those moments didn't vanish, but they no longer lived with sharp edges. They became part of the great murmur of the past, buried beneath the weight of growing up and moving forward. The world didn't shatter overnight. It shifted slowly. The people, their lives, and the land they worked all moved quietly from one age into the next, carrying with them only fragments of what once was. The country schools in the Salinas Valley became the centre of community life. In the absence of strong institutions, the small schoolhouses served as gathering places not only for education, but for politics, celebrations, debates, and dances. Election polls were set up inside them. Children recited poems and sang songs on holidays, and adults met there for social events and meetings. The teacher wasn't just a source of knowledge, but a symbol of refinement, often admired as a match for marriage. Families took pride when a son married a teacher, believing her intelligence and influence would shape future generations. Protestant churches, still new to the area, struggled to take root, while older Catholic missions slowly fell into disrepair. Their libraries were discarded, their structures neglected. The sense of cultural preservation and learning shifted toward the schools, and with them the teachers became the quiet keepers of tradition and progress. In this setting, Samuel Hamilton's daughters were admired. Though the Hamilton family was poor, the girls were raised with pride, intelligence, and elegance. They were not seen as victims of hardship, but rather as something close to nobility. Samuel's wife, Liza, raised them with strict discipline, but they inherited Samuel's spirit, curious, imaginative, and bright. The Hamilton daughters stood out in any room they entered. Their clothes might have been plain, but their confidence and wit made them glow. Neighbours noticed how different the Hamiltons were. Their daughters spoke well, read widely, and carried themselves with quiet assurance. They weren't destined to become tired farm wives. Instead, they walked with grace and subtle strength, reflecting a family legacy of intellect and integrity. Though the land around them was dry and hard, the Hamilton home produced a richness of its own, a richness of character and spirit that made it one of the most respected families in the valley. Adam settled into his land in the Salinas Valley with a sense of excitement and vision. From the shade of a giant oak tree he looked out over the rolling hills, the river cutting through the valley and the flat, fertile ground stretching beyond. The property had belonged to the Sanchez family before him, and though it was barely cultivated, Adam saw its potential clearly in his mind. Fields of wheat, green patches of alfalfa near the river, and a thriving home built to last generations. He poured himself into restoring the old Sanchez house. The original structure was gutted and rebuilt with fresh wood, pine that still smelled of sap, redwood boards, and thick whitewash that gave the walls a warm glow. A new roof was laid, floors were replaced, and the decaying interior was swept clean and opened up. Carpenters from Salinas worked steadily while Adam supervised, making decisions not just for comfort but for permanence. This wouldn't just be a place to live, it would be the foundation of a family line. He hired a gardener to tame the surrounding land. Ancient rose bushes were pruned, new flower beds planted, and vegetable patches laid out with care. The spring on the property was channeled into little streams that crisscrossed the garden, bringing water and life into every corner. Paths were cleared, fences set up, and the whole place began to look less like a forgotten piece of earth and more like a home. Adam imagined children running through the grass, generations living in the house after him. He had no doubts. The Salinas Valley, with its dry hills and hidden richness, felt like the perfect place to plant roots and build something lasting. For the first time in years, Adam Trask had purpose, and he poured himself into it completely. Samuel Hamilton rode home through a moonlit night, the valley bathed in pale light that made the hills look bleached and silent. The landscape shimmered in silver and black, still and breathless, alive only with quiet motion from night creatures. Deer browsed in the open. Rabbits, mice, and other small animals scurried or froze in place when danger was near. Predators were out too, foxes sniffing the air, wild cats moving low through brush, owls gliding silently overhead. The coyotes howled with eerie joy, their voices echoing in the dry hills. Samuel's horse, Doxology, moved steadily through it all, his hooves disturbing the hush like a steady drumbeat. Samuel himself felt unease rising inside him. It wasn't tied to anything specific, just a dull ache in his gut and a sense of heaviness. He called it Weltschmerz, the sadness of the world, a kind of spiritual weariness that sometimes drifted in for no reason. He couldn't point to a cause, but it hung over him like a fog. He reached home and greeted Liza, who as always was calm and steady. They talked a bit, and she sensed that something was on his mind. Samuel tried to push the feeling away, focusing on the work ahead. But the sadness lingered in him, stirred by the moonlight and the stillness of the land. This brief, quiet moment highlighted the depth of Samuel's character. Though cheerful and wise on the outside, he also carried a deep sensitivity to the world. He felt things that others couldn't name, a connection to life and death, joy and sorrow, all wound together in the dusty hills of the Salinas Valley. Kathy, now living with Adam Trask, waited for the birth of her child with quiet detachment. She did not love the farm, and she did not love Adam. Her pregnancy grew more visible by the day, but she remained emotionally untouched by it. Her belly became huge, swollen far beyond what was common, and the weight distorted her movements. She had to use her hands to stand or move, but despite the physical strain, the rest of her body remained unchanged. Her arms, shoulders, and face still looked slender and girlish. There were no signs of maternal development. Her breast did not swell. Her body gave no indication that it was preparing to nurse a baby. When she sat behind a table, no one could tell she was pregnant at all. In those days, there were no prenatal tests or medical supports. Childbirth came with risk and pain, and often a woman gave up a tooth for each baby born. Kathy did not complain. She sat still for hours under the oak tree, her hands resting in her lap, her expression unreadable. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking. Adam remained devoted, still blinded by the image of her he'd created in his mind. He believed she was delicate and good, while in reality she was indifferent, waiting, hiding her true nature as always. The people around her saw her as quiet and fragile, unaware of the monster that lay beneath the surface. Kathy was still, as ever, closed off to love, empathy, or connection. Whatever she felt, or didn't feel, remained locked inside her. She offered no explanation, no emotion, no insight. She simply waited, her swollen belly pulling her body forward while her heart stayed cold. Horace Quinn, the new deputy sheriff for the King City district, was still settling into his role. He missed the quiet of his ranch, and his wife disliked how often the job pulled him away. Still, Horace had ambitions. He hoped the position might one day lead to running for sheriff, a role with dignity and influence. Nothing major had happened since his appointment, until rumours started spreading that Adam Trask had been shot. The gossip came from various sources, a local Indian, and the carpenters working on Adam's house. Horace saddled up right away and rode out to investigate, leaving his wife to finish butchering a pig they had planned to process together that morning. Along the way, he ran into Julius Euskadi, a well-off Basque man trying to decide between quail hunting and taking the train to Salinas. Julius mentioned a new place in town, a brothel called Faye's, said to be as fancy as any in San Francisco, with a piano player and all. Horace brushed off the invitation. He was headed to the Trask place on more serious business. When Horace arrived at the house, he found Adam injured but alive. Kathy had shot him, but she told everyone it was an accident. She looked calm and convincing as always. Her story was that Adam had startled her, or that the gun had gone off unexpectedly. Horace didn't buy it entirely, but Kathy's performance was airtight. There was no real evidence, and Adam, still in shock, wouldn't speak against her. The story was wrapped up quickly, filed away as an unfortunate incident. Kathy, visibly pregnant and seemingly fragile, earned sympathy. Horace left the Trask home with more questions than answers, unsettled by the coldness he saw in her eyes. Adam, wounded both physically and emotionally, remained silent, unable or unwilling to face what had happened to him, or who Kathy truly was. Kathy's labour begins suddenly in the Trask home, catching everyone off guard. With no doctor available, Lee and Samuel Hamilton step in to deliver the baby. The atmosphere is tense and urgent. Kathy, already emotionally distant, shows no sign of maternal instinct. She fights the pain with cold resistance, not fear. Blood pools on the floor as she gives birth to twin boys, Cal and Aaron. Samuel is the one who tells Adam he's now a father. Adam is overjoyed, still holding on to the dream of a perfect family. He sees the moment as a beginning. Kathy sees it as the end. She shows no interest in the babies. Her body is broken, but her mind is calculating. She has no intention of staying. As she recovers, Kathy regains her strength in secret. One night she dresses, loads a revolver, and announces that she's leaving. Adam stands in front of the door begging her to stay, confused and desperate. Without hesitation, Kathy shoots him in the shoulder. She doesn't run, she walks out calmly and disappears into the night, leaving her newborn sons behind. Her departure marks the unravelling of Adam's world. Kathy sheds the role of wife and mother like a costume, returning to the cold, ruthless path she'd always intended to follow. The Salinas Valley, like any growing place, passed through phases. First came the pioneers, the tough, childlike openers of the land, who could survive the wild but were vulnerable to more civilized cunning. Once the frontier had been softened, the businessmen and lawyers followed, carving up property and laying claims with smooth words and legal papers. And after them came something else entirely. Culture. Culture meant escape. Whether it came from churches or brothels, it served the same purpose, lifting people out of the hardship of daily life. The churches brought music, community, and ideals. The brothels brought distraction, intimacy, and release. Both arrived around the same time, and both provided refuge. They pretended to be opposites, but in truth they served a similar human need. The churches, loud and enthusiastic, sprang up across the valley. Congregations gathered under unfinished roofs, sermons echoed from splintered pulpits, and choirs sang with trembling voices. These institutions promised salvation, but also stirred up conflict. Denominations clashed over small differences in doctrine, each convinced the others were wrong. Still, they brought with them a kind of structure, a shared set of values built on scripture. Even people who didn't attend services were shaped by the ethics and poetry that flowed from these places. Though rough around the edges, the churches brought music and a sense of order. They pricked the conscience, awakened reflection, and offered something like hope. They were not pure, but they carried the potential for purity, much like the people they served. As the Salinas Valley continued to grow, these elements, faith, desire, ambition, became woven into the lives of its people. The land was no longer just dirt and crops. It had started to dream. In the late afternoon light, Faye sat in her brothel in Salinas, watching the sun turn Fremont's Peak pink. Inside the house, her cook clattered around in the kitchen while soft sounds echoed from the nearby streets. Cotton Eye, the hunched, half-blind piano player, knocked gently on her door. He told her he wasn't feeling well and asked to be excused from playing that evening. Faye, though disappointed, let him go, urging him to take better care of himself. Kate, who everyone now knew as a sweet, quiet young woman working at the house, spoke gently to him too. She called out his lie, noting he had indeed been smoking. Cotton Eye grew nervous, insisting he hadn't, but quickly backed down when Kate said otherwise. After he left, Faye expressed sympathy for the man, calling him pitiful. Kate, standing near her, told her she was too trusting, too willing to believe in the goodness of others. Faye, emotional, dabbed her eyes and smiled warmly at Kate. She said Kate was like the daughter she never had. Kate responded with affection, comforting her. The connection between them had grown strong. Faye saw Kate not just as an employee, but as family. She confided in her more and more, growing to depend on her both emotionally and in the management of the house. Kate, always watching and calculating, encouraged this closeness. She had her own plans in mind, plans that depended on Faye trusting her completely. Step by step, she was embedding herself deeper into the business, into Faye's heart, and into the structure of the brothel itself. Her voice was soft, her touch kind, her eyes gentle, but everything she did was part of a larger, hidden design. As the pink light faded from the hills, Kate sat beside Faye, smiling and patient, waiting for the right moment to move closer to everything she wanted. Kate moved with patience and precision. She never rushed. While others scrambled and tripped over themselves with anxiety or impulse, Kate took her time. She understood the end goal clearly, but once she knew what she wanted, she let go of the outcome and focused entirely on the method. She worked like a strategist, building her plan piece by piece, waiting for the perfect moments to act, never drawing attention to herself. She used those around her without them ever realizing. If someone was going to speak too much, she let them. If someone was going to make a mistake, she quietly positioned herself to benefit. Her control wasn't loud. It was silent, subtle, and steady. Kate allowed others to believe they were in charge, while she gently turned their strength against them, guiding them toward their own defeat. She began gathering the pieces for her next move. Quietly, she learned more about Faye's affairs, her finances, her habits, and most importantly, her will. The cook, likely without knowing the importance of what he said, mentioned that Faye had written one. That detail settled something in Kate's mind. Behind closed doors and always alone, Kate drafted scenarios. If something didn't feel solid, she dismantled the idea and rebuilt it stronger. Her manipulation wasn't obvious. There were no dramatic acts or sudden plays. Instead, she set small mechanisms in motion. Nudges, comments, little changes in tone or suggestion. These small, forgettable things would eventually form the foundation of something much larger. As she moved through the brothel, smiling and soft-spoken, she gave no sign of calculation. But every interaction was purposeful. Faye trusted her more each day, and Kate made sure that trust deepened. With the will now on her radar, she knew what came next. All she had to do was continue as she had been, kind, helpful, affectionate. Everything else would come in time. Adam fell into a deep, paralysing depression. The house he had worked so hard to restore was left unfinished. Rain soaked the exposed boards, and weeds overran the garden he had carefully planned. He barely moved, and when he did, it was slow and without purpose. His mind drifted in a fog, and when moments of clarity broke through, they brought pain so sharp he retreated even deeper into the haze. He couldn't bring himself to care for his twin sons. Though he heard them laugh and cry, they felt like reminders of Kathy, not blessings. He avoided them, as he avoided everything else. Neighbours came by hoping to offer comfort or support, but Adam didn't see them. He wasn't angry or unkind, he simply wasn't present. Over time the visits stopped. People gave up and stayed away. Lee, the Chinese servant Adam had hired before Kathy gave birth, became the boys' caretaker. He cooked, cleaned, bathed, and fed them. He spoke to them in Cantonese, and the twins responded to his words with early recognition. Through the daily work of raising them, Lee grew to love the boys. He tried to pull Adam back into life with conversation and gentle prodding, but nothing worked. Samuel Hamilton, concerned for the children and saddened by what had become of Adam, visited twice. He tried to help, to break through the shell Adam had built around himself. But Samuel's efforts didn't make a dent, and Liza, his wife, noticed the toll it was taking on him. She warned him not to go back. "You come back a changed man," she said. "You don't change him, he changes you." Samuel argued for the sake of the boys, but Liza wouldn't hear it. She was worried about her own family, and she saw how the sadness at the Trask house was spreading like a sickness. In the hills above the Salinas Valley, the house that was meant to be a home full of life now stood still, quiet, and haunted by absence. Among Samuel Hamilton's children, Una was the most serious and least joyful. She shared a private intellectual bond with her father, devouring books and ideas with a hunger uncommon even among her siblings. While others joked and played, Una was intense, focused, and deeply drawn to learning. Her greatest joy came from the quiet exchange of thoughts with Samuel, and the two shared a silent understanding that set her apart. Una eventually married a man named Anderson, a dark, intense figure obsessed with photography. He was a quiet, methodical thinker who lived in near poverty so he could pursue his goal, to capture the world not in black and white, but in full colour. While the Hamiltons were dreamers, half lifting off the ground with ideas and speculation, Anderson had no patience for that kind of thinking. He was rigid, practical, and determined to prove only what he could measure. Samuel's family made him uneasy. Their way of seeing the world seemed reckless and strange to him. Una, however, made sense. Her lack of humour and emotional restraint was a comfort. Soon after marrying, Anderson took Una far away to a remote place in the north near the Oregon border. He cut her off from her family, and whatever life they built was stark and lonely. The letters Una sent home were dry and bleak. She never complained, but there was no warmth or happiness in her words. She simply reported that she was alive and hoped the others were well. Her family grew increasingly worried. Samuel missed her deeply, but there was little he could do. The bright daughter he once whispered stories to had vanished into a dark and isolated world. Though Anderson may have eventually succeeded in his work, developing what would become colour photography, he had taken something from Una in the process. Her spark, her connection, and her joy. Una's death devastated Samuel Hamilton. It broke something in him that had never cracked before. He had lived with imagination, laughter, and a quiet sense that life, though hard, was full of wonder. But her death was different. It wasn't just grief. It was like the world had betrayed him. For Samuel, death had always been theoretical, something to consider and ponder, but not truly real. He'd lived as though it didn't apply to him or those he loved. When Una died, the truth of mortality struck him with unbearable force. Liza, on the other hand, endured the loss in her steady, matter-of-fact way. She felt the sorrow, of course, but she accepted it. Death was part of the order of things for her, no less real than the seasons or scripture. While Samuel collapsed inward, Liza carried on. She baked pies, planned meals for the funeral, and made sure Samuel had clean clothes and polished shoes. She didn't fall apart because falling apart wouldn't change anything. To her, life still had to be lived, even with heartbreak. The difference between them became stark. Samuel, once full of stories and invention, grew quieter and older all at once. He stopped tinkering, stopped dreaming. The man who had once seemed ageless now looked worn and tired. The joy had drained from him. Lisa saw the change but didn't know how to stop it. She accepted that he was grieving, but she also saw that something deep inside him had shattered. His imagination, once limitless, was now a source of pain. Eventually Samuel made a decision. He would leave the ranch. He would go to Salinas and live out his days away from the land that had once held so much promise. It was a quiet retreat, not of weakness, but of resignation. Samuel, the dreamer of the valley, had finally lost the part of himself that kept the dreams alive. That year, winter brought a rare abundance to the Salinas Valley. Rain fell gently and steadily, soaking deep into the soil. By February the hills were thick with grass, and the livestock glistened with health. Even the dry Hamilton ranch looked beautiful, lush and alive. Spring arrived with a burst of colour. Flowers painted the hills in bright yellow and blue. The land, usually so dry and lean, seemed to bloom with hope. Tom Hamilton was alone on the ranch. He went about his chores, watching the valley change under the soft rains. One afternoon in March, he sat outside the forge, soaking in the quiet beauty of the land. The clouds above had shifted from sunny to grey, hinting at another storm. As he sat there, he heard hooves pounding down the road. A boy, just old enough to ride fast, galloped up to the house. Without stopping, he threw a yellow telegram onto the ground, turned the horse and rode off again. Tom called after him, but the boy was already gone. He bent down slowly, picked up the envelope and sat again on the bench. For a long moment, he didn't open it. He stared at the land, the hills, the old house. He seemed to be trying to hold on to something before it changed. Then he tore it open and read the brief formal message. 4 words that said everything. The name, the event, the time. Samuel Hamilton had died. Tom folded the telegram slowly and carefully, again and again, until it was small enough to press between 2 fingers. He got up, walked through the empty house and into his bedroom. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. The message had landed like a stone in his chest. Samuel, his father, the centre of the family's warmth and imagination, was gone. Outside, the valley remained bright and green, as if the world hadn't changed. But for Tom, everything had. Adam Trask rode the train back from Salinas in a fog of thought and emotion. He had just attended Samuel Hamilton's funeral and had also met with Kate, but instead of feeling sad or bitter, he felt strangely light. Something had shifted inside him. It was as if the heaviness he'd been carrying since Kathy left had finally cracked and let in air. His mind wasn't clear, but it stirred with a strange, bubbling energy. He felt younger, hopeful even, and deeply alive. Instead of heading straight to the livery stable, Adam walked to Will Hamilton's new automobile garage. Will, now a successful businessman, sat in a sleek office with glass walls, watching the activity of his mechanics. His body had grown rounder with prosperity, and his thoughts were on business even as he pretended to mourn his father. He wondered briefly about his brother Tom, who had gone to San Francisco after the funeral and hadn't been heard from since. Will assumed Tom was drowning his sorrow in drink, while he himself preferred to bury grief in work. Adam's arrival surprised Will. The two men talked, and Adam, still riding the wave of strange clarity, began asking about automobiles. He was fascinated by the machines, how they ran, and how they were changing the world. Will explained his business with pride, and Adam listened with a kind of hunger. He didn't say much about the funeral, nor about Kate. Instead, he looked ahead, as though something had restarted in him. The meeting marked a quiet turning point for Adam. After years of silence and despair, something inside him was waking up. His visit to Kate may have forced him to see her for who she really was, and Samuel's death may have reminded him that time was moving forward whether he wanted it to or not. Adam didn't know exactly what would come next, but for the first time in a long while he wanted to find out. Spring returned to the Salinas Valley, warm and bright. The river stayed within its banks, running clear through its sandy bed. Willows and blackberry brambles grew thick and green along the edges. It was a peaceful morning, and in a tangle of driftwood and vines, a small brush rabbit sat still in the sun, grooming itself and enjoying the quiet. Its nose twitched. Its ears flicked at soft sounds. Then, without warning, a bamboo arrow struck, piercing it cleanly through. From the brush, two boys emerged. Twin brothers, 10 years old, Aaron and Cal Trask. They each carried a handmade bow and quivers of arrows on their backs. They had been hunting together, moving silently, crouched in the undergrowth like shadows. The rabbit was their prize, and they ran to inspect it, full of breathless excitement. Aaron, the gentler of the two, was visibly shaken by the rabbit's death, while Cal remained calm, even satisfied. The twins were opposites in many ways. Aaron was fair-haired, idealistic, and kind-hearted. Cal was darker, more curious, and often pulled by emotions he didn't fully understand. Where Aaron followed rules and believed in goodness, Cal was drawn to questions and the edge of things. They were close, but very different, and even at this young age the contrast between them was clear. Lee watched over them, guiding their development with patience and quiet wisdom. He spoke to them in both English and Chinese, and they understood him deeply, trusting him in ways they didn't always trust their father. Adam, though no longer lost in grief, still kept a certain distance. He was rebuilding his life, slowly and cautiously, but the boys were being shaped more by Lee's constant presence than Adam's tentative attention. As the boys carried their rabbit back home, the morning sun rose higher, casting long shadows behind them. Side by side, the two sons of Adam Trask walk through the fields, one smiling, one silent. That evening at the supper table, the Trask twins noticed something different, something they had never experienced before. Their father was paying attention. Adam, who for most of their lives had been a distant presence, suddenly seemed alert. He listened when they spoke, asked questions, and watched them with interest. For years, Lee had been their true guardian, raising them, guiding them, even shaping their understanding of Adam through second-hand stories and made-up lessons. But now, Adam was present, and it left the boys unsure how to respond. The shift unsettled them. They were used to a father who looked past them, not into them. Now, his eyes followed their words. He asked about their day. "You were hunting," he said, and the boys, wary, admitted they had been. They said they had shot a rabbit, and Adam asked who had hit it. Aaron hesitated. Cal finally said it was his arrow, but then backed off, suggesting maybe Aaron's arrow had struck first. There was uncertainty in his voice, and something deeper, guilt, perhaps, or a desire to give his brother credit. Adam pushed gently, asking how they marked their arrows. He had done that as a boy. The question hung in the air and the conversation tapered into silence. The boys were not used to being seen, and the spotlight of their father's attention made them cautious and unsure. But for Adam, it was a beginning. For the first time in years, he saw his sons clearly. He noticed their mannerisms, their differences, the way Cal deferred and Aaron stepped back. Something inside Adam stirred, a need to understand these boys who had grown up right in front of him while he was lost in grief. He had returned from Salinas not just awake, but willing to connect, and the boys, though uncertain, had noticed. After years of silence, Adam wrote a letter to his brother Charles. It was the first communication between them in over a decade. Once the letter was sent, Adam became anxious, checking for a reply, wondering if Charles would respond, or if he'd moved away, or if he was angry. The uncertainty stirred restlessness in Adam. He tried to distract himself by spending more time with his sons, but his efforts felt forced and awkward. He hovered over the boys, asking questions about school and pushing for conversation they didn't want to have. "What did you learn today?" he asked. "Nothing," came the answer. Adam kept trying, asking about stories, pictures, anything he could grasp onto. The boys, unused to this kind of attention, found his sudden interest uncomfortable. They had already built their relationship with Lee. He understood them, respected their rhythms. Adam's approach was clumsy and unfamiliar. At one point, Cal borrowed Adam's pocket knife, hoping he would forget about it. But Adam asked for it back so he could teach them how to make willow whistles. The trouble was, Adam had forgotten the trick. He fumbled with the cuts and couldn't get a sound. The twins watched, unimpressed. Lee had taught them how to make whistles years ago. Adam didn't know that. His attempts to connect were met with blank stares and faint embarrassment. Just as the air was growing heavier with awkward tension, Will Hamilton arrived in a brand new Ford. The car came roaring up the dusty road, its motor loud and proud. It was a spectacle, unlike anything the boys had seen. Will, now firmly rooted in the world of business and technology, brought with him the energy of change. The modern world was pushing into the valley, with automobiles and engines replacing horses and stillness. Adam stood in the middle, between his past with Charles, his uncertain present with his sons, and a future that seemed to be arriving faster than he could keep up. After mailing his first letter to Charles in over 10 years, Adam became restless with anticipation. He wondered aloud why there hadn't been a reply yet, forgetting how little time had passed. "Maybe he's mad," he said, "or maybe he's moved." Lee tried to calm him. It's only been a few days, but Adam's thoughts churned. Now that the letter was out, he began to fear what it might bring. What if Charles actually came? To distract himself, Adam turned his focus to his sons, but his attention came too suddenly and awkwardly. He peppered them with questions about school, what they read, what they learned. The boys answered with short, flat replies, confused by their father's sudden interest. When they mentioned reading a fable about an eagle, Adam tried to recall the ending. "I forget what happens," he admitted. The boys weren't impressed. Trying to bond with them, Adam retrieved his pocket knife, one Cal had hoped he would forget about, and decided to teach them how to make willow whistles. But he had forgotten the trick. He fumbled with the cuts and couldn't make a sound. The twins, who had learned how to make whistles years ago from Lee, watched with thinly veiled disappointment. The moment, meant to build connection, only deepened the distance. Then, in a rush of noise and dust, Will Hamilton arrived in a brand new Ford. The car roared up the road like a mechanical beast, its engine whining, its top swaying. The boy's eyes lit up at the sight of it. Will, full of energy and pride, had come from a different world. A world of industry, of commerce, of noise and motion. He brought with him the future, wrapped in metal and gasoline. Adam stood caught between two generations, his own fading past and his son's dawning world, wondering how, or if, he could ever bridge the gap. 1 week after learning to drive, Adam proudly pulled his new Ford up the main street of King City. Lee sat beside him, and the twins, Aaron and Cal, sat straight-backed in the back seat. When Adam parked, they all recited the shutdown routine like a ceremony. Brake on, advance gas, switch off, and the engine sputtered to a stop. It was a moment of pride for Adam, a public declaration that he was keeping up with the times. At the post office, the postmaster sneered at the car. "I see you've got one of the damn things," he said bitterly. Adam smiled, unfazed. The man ranted about how automobiles were ruining everything, how people no longer waited patiently for mail, how the world had become frantic. But beneath his anger, Adam sensed envy. The man hadn't bought one yet. Likely his wife wanted one and he resisted. The car was more than just transportation. It was status, and it was changing the valley. Adam picked up his mail, a single long envelope. He held it carefully. A man who doesn't receive many letters doesn't open one quickly. He studied the handwriting, the weight, the postmark. It was from Charles. Back in the car, Adam opened the letter and read it in silence. Charles had sent money. A large sum. Enclosed was a cheque from a trust company in New York. 100,000. Charles didn't explain much, just a few short lines. The gift was generous, but it stirred complicated emotions in Adam. He didn't understand Charles's intentions, nor what this meant for their broken relationship. Adam was quiet on the drive home. The Ford rattled along the dusty road as he turned the letter over in his hand, reading it again. Money had arrived, but so had something heavier, a sense of unfinished business, of ties not yet severed, of things between brothers that remained unspoken and unresolved. Adam spent the morning pacing and reflecting. Finally, unable to bear the weight of uncertainty any longer, he told Lee he was going to visit her, Kate. The money Charles had sent, the years of silence and the wreckage of their marriage had built into a storm inside him. Lee supported the decision, sensing it had to be done face to face. No letter would settle what needed to be settled. Adam took the rig to King City and walked to the familiar but transformed building, Kate's place. A thick-armed Finn answered the door and led him to a plain white-walled dining room. The room felt cold and impersonal. Adam sat alone at the table until Kate appeared, dressed simply but still striking. Time had changed her, though. She walked with a slight limp, and something in her expression had hardened. Their conversation was clipped and tense. Adam told her he had come to talk about the twins. Kate acted indifferent. She said she had nothing to do with them and wanted no part of their lives. Adam mentioned the money Charles had sent, $100,000, but even that didn't stir much in her. She accused him of coming to gloat, of showing off how well he had done. Adam, in turn, asked how she could live in this place, running a business like this. Her cruelty surfaced again, venomous and sharp. But Adam didn't respond with anger. Instead, he looked at her with something closer to pity. The visit shook him, but it also clarified something. He saw Kate clearly now, without the illusion or romance he once wrapped around her. She was hollow, cruel, and frightened beneath her armour. The woman who had once shattered his life now seemed small. Adam left without saying much more. On the train ride home he felt strangely calm. He hadn't won anything, but he had faced her, and that alone had given him back something he'd lost. His sense of himself. Dessie Hamilton was the light in every room she entered. While her sisters each had their strengths, Molly was pretty, Olive was strong-willed, and Una was thoughtful, Dessie had laughter. It flowed out of her and spread to others like a happy contagion. Her dressmaking shop wasn't just a business, it was a sanctuary of joy. Women came for fittings but left with tears of laughter and spirits lifted. She turned the ordinary into theatre, pinning jokes onto cushions, turning gossip into performance, and making Salinas feel less heavy. People couldn't quite explain what made Dessie so beloved, but they knew they felt better after being near her. Even when her stories were nonsense or her antics simple, the warmth she shared was unforgettable. She had a gift for making people feel like life was, at its core, funny and bearable. But something changed after her failed love. No one knew the full story. She didn't speak of it. She didn't cry or grow bitter. But something inside her dimmed. She became quieter. The wild laughter turned into chuckles, and the joy she once gave so freely now came at a cost. Her shop began to struggle. The mood in the room shifted. People still came, but something was missing, something essential. Eventually Dessie closed the shop. She sold it quietly and left Salinas. She told everyone she wanted to change, that she was tired of city life, but her family suspected more. Something had hurt her deeply, and she was retreating. She moved back home for a while, and then planned to go visit her brother Tom on the Hamilton ranch. He wrote to her, thrilled by the idea, eager for company and laughter again. She hadn't been to the ranch in years, and Tom longed to see her. He hoped her visit would bring back the brightness that once lit their childhood. Dessie boarded the train, smiling gently, carrying her grief quietly, hoping the ranch might give her something to laugh about again. That year, the hills of the Salinas Valley stayed green longer than usual. Wild oats drooped under the weight of their seed, and the springs flowed late into summer. The cattle were fat and glossy, and the people began to forget the dry years. Optimism filled the valley. Farmers spent recklessly, buying more land than they could afford, believing the good times would last. Tom Hamilton threw himself into work with a kind of desperate joy. He wasn't just fixing things, he was trying to build a life full of meaning. He repainted the old house, cleaned the sheds, and even designed a crude flush toilet after studying one in King City. To solve the problem of slow water, he built a windmill that turned in even the lightest breeze and set up a redwood tank beside the house. He invented gadgets, crafted tools, and dreamed of sending his models to the patent office. His energy was constant, but it wasn't effortless like Samuel's had been. Tom was working to create happiness from scratch, constructing it, forcing it into shape. Desi arrived and tried to keep pace with her brother's energy. She woke early to help with chores, only to find he'd already done them. She watched him closely. His joy didn't rise naturally. It was manufactured, deliberate. And behind her own gentle smiles, Desi carried a silent pain. Though she'd been the most beloved of the Hamilton children, the one with laughter and light, she kept her sorrow locked deep inside. Whatever had broken her, whatever love had failed her, she had never spoken of it. Not to her sisters, not to her mother, not even to her closest friends. But on the ranch, with Tom bustling and cheerful, she tried to match his brightness. For the first time in a while, she let herself relax into the rhythm of their shared childhood home, surrounded by tools, wind and memory. Lee helped move Adam and the twins to Salinas, settling them into Desi's small house. He did nearly everything, packing, planning and preparing, while Adam hovered, slow and distracted. Once the house was set and the boys were asleep, Lee approached Adam with a quiet formality. It was time for him to go. He had stayed longer than planned, out of love and duty, but now felt the need to follow a path of his own. Adam sensed it was coming. Lee admitted he had prepared a proper speech, something thoughtful and ceremonial, but abandoned it. He simply said he had delayed leaving long enough and needed to go before he changed his mind. Adam didn't fight him. He agreed, even if the idea pained him. "It will tear the boys to pieces," he said. But Lee, always wise, responded, "It's my observation that children always surprise us." At breakfast the next morning, Adam told the boys, "Lee is going away." Cal, without missing a beat, asked if they could still go to the basketball game that night. "Costs 10 cents, he added. Aaron chimed in too, casual, almost indifferent. Lee had been a central figure in their lives, and yet, as Lee predicted, the boys didn't react as expected. Lee packed quietly and slipped away. The departure was without drama, but it marked a turning point. He had been more than a servant. He was a guide, a moral compass, and in many ways their truest parent. His absence would be felt in time. Meanwhile, Adam continued trying to understand his sons. He noticed how different they were, Aaron dreamy and gentle, Cal darker and more searching. That night, while watching them from the shadows, Adam saw them more clearly than ever before. There was love in his gaze, but also confusion. He was beginning to realize that raising sons required more than affection. It demanded attention, understanding, and perhaps most difficult of all, self-reflection. Cal and Aaron started school in Salinas, attending the massive and ornate West End Grammar School. Coming from a small country school, they were overwhelmed by the size, the structure, and the rigid rules. The school was divided into boys' and girls' yards by a high fence, and each grade had its own classroom, teacher, and symbolic painting. Cal and Aaron, both placed in the 7th grade, found themselves under the grim gaze of Lao Kun, a classical painting of a man wrapped in snakes, an image that haunted and fascinated them. The city was a different world. Everything was bigger, more crowded, more competitive. The twins, used to open spaces and quiet fields, now navigated noisy halls and sharp-edged kids. They didn't fit in easily. Aaron, soft and polite, became a target for the tougher boys, while Cal, darker and quicker to adapt, began to understand how to use charm and quiet manipulation to survive. He sensed things others missed: power, weakness, desire. At recess, Cal watched the other boys closely. He noticed how they tested each other, how they bullied, how they postured. He didn't join in right away. Instead, he studied them like puzzles. Aaron struggled more. His innocence, which had once seemed pure and admirable, now made him a misfit. Their teacher saw the contrast. Aaron was a bright student, attentive and well-mannered. Cal was clever too, but he carried a weight behind his eyes, a kind of quiet tension. One teacher remarked to another, "There's something in that one, like he's always listening for something that isn't being said." At home, Adam tried to keep up. He asked about their days and tried to be involved, but the boys were changing fast, shaped now by a city, a school, and a world far more complex than the one he remembered. February of 1915 brought rain and cold to Salinas. The river swelled, and the streets turned muddy and grey. The Trasks were now fully settled in town, and something remarkable had shifted. Lee, who had once lived with his bags packed, finally began to make a true home for himself. For the first time in his life, Lee gave himself permission to be comfortable. He moved into the largest bedroom near the front door, dipped into his savings, and bought what he never had before: a good bed, a soft rug, a proper reading chair under a strong lamp. He built shelves for his books, tacked prints on the walls, and even bought a typewriter so he could begin learning to write properly. The dream of his bookstore had faded, but something new was forming in its place, a rootedness, a quiet kind of happiness. Lee also began to transform the Trask home. He spent Adam's money with purpose, installing gas lines, electric wiring, and a telephone. He ordered new furniture, carpets, a gas stove, a large icebox, and even a water heater. The house became modern, efficient, and cosy, one of the most well-equipped homes in Salinas. Lee defended the spending with a grin. "You have plenty of money. It would be a shame not to enjoy it." Adam didn't resist. In fact, he was amused. "I'd like to buy something too," he said. Lee, ever thoughtful, suggested he go to Logan's music store and listen to one of the new phonographs. Adam liked the idea. After years of emotional sleepwalking, he was slowly waking to life again. His world had shifted, from grief and distance to warmth, noise and invention. Outside, the rain continued to fall, soaking the valley, but inside the Trask home there was warmth, laughter, and the quiet hum of change. Cal had always felt the difference between himself and his brother. Aaron seemed to earn love without effort, while Cal, trying to mimic him, often found only suspicion. Repeated rejection had taught him to keep his emotions hidden and to expect little in return. Still, his quiet desire for connection lingered, especially with his father, Adam. Even the smallest moments, like leaning against his father's knee and feeling a hand rest on his shoulder, held enormous meaning for him. In Salinas, Cal lived like a ghost among his classmates. He was polite and well-liked on the surface, but remained distant. At night, while others slept, he walked the streets alone, slipping into Chinatown, passing pool halls, blending into the dark. The city constables noted his presence, but since he never caused trouble, they left him be. Over time, Cal began to piece together something hidden. Hints in conversations, remarks from drunks, fragments of street gossip. From the moment he had overheard Adam and Lee speak on the ranch, he knew his mother wasn't dead. Slowly he gathered the truth. One night Cal met a drunken farmer named Rabbit Holman, who boasted about selling land and planned to spend his money at Kate's, a notorious house in town. Cal approached Kate's place with a mix of dread and determination. He had followed the trail of whispers and clues for weeks, and now, at last, he stood at the door of the brothel, run by the woman he knew as his mother. Though still a boy, he passed unnoticed into the dim-lit room, moving through shadows and silence until he reached her. The moment they faced each other, Kate recognized him. She was thinner than he expected, hardened by years of control and suspicion. The air between them was charged. Kate, calculating and cold. Cal, quiet but burning with questions. He didn't come to beg for love. He came to see, to confirm that the fragments he'd gathered were real. Kate saw the steel in him, saw herself. She tried to dismiss him, tried to rattle him with sharp words and the poisonous confidence that had once broken men. But Cal didn't flinch. He didn't need anything from her. What disturbed Kate most was not his presence, but his gaze. He didn't look at her with disgust, not even hate, just calm understanding. He wasn't shocked by what she was. He had expected it, and he had already decided that her existence, her choices, didn't define him. For the first time, Kate looked into the eyes of someone she couldn't read, someone who frightened her, not with violence or rebellion, but with silence, control, and the clear refusal to be ruined by her. The meeting was brief, but its weight was immense. Cal didn't find what he was looking for. What he found instead was clarity. His mother was nothing like the ghostly ideal he had imagined. She was hollow, and he left not with answers, but with the knowledge that her power had no hold on him. The experience broke something open in California. He left and sought out Lee. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Cal finally admitted what he had discovered. He had seen his mother. He asked Lee a series of rapid, piercing questions. Did his father know? Why did he say she was dead? Did Adam ever hurt her? Why did she shoot him? Why did she leave? Lee answered each question with care and honesty. He told Cal that Adam had loved her completely, never hurt her, and had lied only to protect his sons from pain. When Cal asked why she had done it, Lee simply said he didn't know. That night, Cal carried the weight of truth and the pain of seeing finally who his mother truly was. Kate sat in her chair, body tense, nerves buzzing under her skin like electric threads. The words Cal had spoken, "I'm glad you're afraid," echoed in her mind, repeating in a loop she couldn't silence. Panic and hatred gripped her, a rare feeling she hadn't experienced since her confrontation with Samuel Hamilton years ago. He had been the only one who'd ever truly seen her, the only person whose eyes could cut through the layers she'd so carefully built. Now, Cal's words had done the same. Not just words, but the way he looked at her. Cold, certain, and knowing. In the quiet of her room, Kate opened the chain around her neck and examined its contents. A gold watch, 2 safe deposit keys, and a small steel tube containing a capsule, 6 grains of morphine. A safe escape if things ever became unbearable. She handled it with practiced care, then tucked it back inside her dress. It wasn't time, not yet. She thought about the money, Charles's money. After his death, she had turned the check into thick bundles of bills and stored them in a safe deposit box in Salinas. She had enough to leave, to disappear, to start over somewhere far away, but she hadn't. Instead, she stayed in the brothel she now controlled, even as her hands grew stiff and gnarled with arthritis. Her beauty had faded, her grip on the house was slipping, and fear was beginning to creep into the edges of her world. Kate, once so calculating and cruel, was starting to unravel. Cal had shown her something dangerous, a reflection, a part of herself, a son of her blood who could see through her, who didn't cower or admire but pitied and threatened. For the first time in years, Kate didn't feel in control, and that loss was more terrifying than death. The country edged closer to war. Though President Wilson had been re-elected on the promise to keep America out of it, excitement and unease spread. British agents moved through towns, buying up supplies. Prices soared, and the buzz of change rippled across the nation. In Salinas, life appeared steady on the surface, but the tremor of the world's tension began to reach even there. Cal and Aaron walked to school in the morning fog. Aaron noticed how tired Cal looked. He had been out late again, walking, thinking. Cal asked if Aaron would consider quitting school to return to the ranch. "We could make some money for father," he said. But Aaron was firm. He wanted out of Salinas. He wanted college. He was sick of being laughed at because of Adam's failed lettuce venture. "I didn't lose that money," Aaron said bitterly, "but I get laughed at the same." Cal tried to encourage him. Maybe if Aaron worked hard, he could take his entrance exams early and leave sooner. But Aaron was full of frustration. He felt trapped, embarrassed, burdened by things he hadn't caused. They reached the schoolyard, surrounded by shouting boys and the looming image of Laocoon painted above their classroom. Aaron turned away, distant, eager to escape not just the town but the heaviness that clung to his life. Cal, left alone, watched his brother and thought about what it meant to carry guilt for things he hadn't done, and to watch someone he loved crumble under the weight of disappointment. In that moment, Cal began to shape a quiet plan. He didn't say it aloud, but something in him had decided. If Aaron couldn't get out, Cal would find a way to help him. Not through kindness, not through words, but by action. By doing something that could make a difference. Something that might finally win his father's love. At first, the war felt distant. In Salinas, people believed in the myth of American invincibility. That one American was worth 20 foreigners, that Mexicans couldn't shoot straight, and that Germany would never dare challenge the United States. But reality began to crack that illusion. Local boys who had joined Pershing's expedition against Pancho Villa returned home weary and humbled. They spoke of Mexican fighters who were skilled, strategic, and fierce, and of how dysentery had done more damage than bullets. The belief in effortless American superiority started to fade. Still, when whispers of Europe's war reached California, the townspeople clung to old bravado. They mocked the idea that the Kaiser could interfere with American trade or sink American ships. But when he did, and when Americans began to die, the distance from the battlefield didn't matter. The war was no longer for other people. In Salinas, the news came not in gunfire but in telegrams. One by one, dreadful slips of paper arrived, announcing that a son, a brother, a friend had died overseas. Families wept behind closed doors, flags were raised, and silence settled over homes. The war, once thrilling and abstract, had become personal, real. The narrator reflects on this shift, not just in Salinas but everywhere. How people watch conflict from afar until it reaches their doorstep. How myths are comforting but fragile. And how, no matter how far removed a town may be from battle, loss always finds its way in. Late in the summer, Lee came home from the market, immaculate in his tailored black clothes. He had adopted a conservative American style, white shirts, stiff collars, and a Southern-style string tie. Adam once teased him about it, to which Lee replied, "Only the rich can afford to dress badly. The poor have to dress well." That day he brought back ingredients to try something special. Winter melon soup, a traditional Chinese recipe taught to him by a cousin in Chinatown. He described it with pride. The melon hollowed and filled with a whole chicken, mushrooms, chestnuts, leeks, and a hint of ginger, then sealed and simmered for 2 days. Adam, lounging in a chair, smiled vaguely. "Sounds good," he said, not really listening. Lee noticed and called him on it. "You didn't even hear me." The conversation shifted. Adam admitted his mind was on Aaron. He sensed his son was slipping away, becoming distant and unreachable. Lee offered his usual calm wisdom, saying that Aaron might be searching for something outside himself, something pure and good, but he might not understand that such ideals don't always exist in the world. Adam, for all his flaws, wanted to protect Aaron's innocence, but even he knew that innocence was fragile and temporary. Lee confessed something too. He was considering going back to San Francisco. Adam protested. He didn't want to lose Lee, who'd become more than a servant. He was family. Lee smiled and said he hadn't decided. He just wanted Adam to know that things were changing. The house was quiet that evening. Outside, the war was beginning to touch their lives. Inside, the people who loved each other most were beginning to drift. And though nothing dramatic had happened that day, it was one of those quiet moments that marked the beginning of something harder to define, a slow unravelling. After Aaron left for college, Abra began to grow closer to the Trask household in a new and unexpected way. Without Aaron to orbit around, she found herself drawn to the rest of his family. She discovered she trusted Adam more than her own father, and she grew to love Lee deeply. But Cal remained a mystery. Sometimes he intrigued her, other times he frightened or unsettled her. He often watched her silently, then looked away when caught, as if constantly evaluating her. When she visited and Cal wasn't home, she felt a strange relief. Around him, she was never sure what was expected. With Aaron, their love had once felt like a private world sealed off from everything else. But now, at Stanford, Aaron was far away, isolated in his studies and writing long romantic letters to her. He poured himself into those letters, as though clinging to her was the only thing keeping him from disappearing into the loneliness of campus life. Abra spent more and more afternoons in the Trask kitchen with Lee, helping him shell peas, string beans, or bake fudge. Sometimes she read him parts of Aaron's letters. They spoke freely with each other about things she couldn't discuss at home. Her own family felt distant, tired, and full of unspoken lies. With Lee, she wanted to tell only the truth, even when she wasn't sure what that truth was. As the days passed, Abra's connection to the Trasks deepened. She wasn't just Aaron's girl anymore. She was becoming her own person, slowly emerging from the shadow of someone else's love. And in Lee's quiet wisdom and kindness, she found the kind of honesty and warmth she hadn't realized she was missing. Joe Valerie lived by a quiet set of rules that had kept him alive. Trust no one, keep your mouth shut, and always go at things the roundabout way. His life had been shaped by hatred, first for his parents, then for teachers, priests, and finally for the world. But under all that hate was one fragile love, for himself. Joe saw the world as hostile, so he armoured himself with suspicion and cold cunning. He believed everyone had a price, and he was always listening for weakness. Now he worked for Kate. She'd found him in prison, pulled strings to get him out, and made him her bodyguard and enforcer. He kept her books, did her errands, and made sure the girls followed her rules. Joe didn't like her. He feared and resented her, but he respected her power. Still, he was always watching, waiting for her to slip, for a way to gain the upper hand. Kate, meanwhile, had grown more paranoid and withdrawn. Her arthritis twisted her hands. She barely left her room. She trusted no one, not even Joe. But she needed him. He knew it, and he watched her like a hawk. When Kate received a visit from a tax agent from the Internal Revenue Service, Joe watched the exchange closely. The agent was polite but firm. Kate owed back taxes, nearly $10,000. She turned pale. Joe saw the moment as a crack forming. He began to think maybe it was time to make his move. Maybe he could find out where she kept her money, wait until the moment was right, and disappear with it. Joe wasn't in a rush. He was patient. He had learned the art of waiting, of appearing harmless. He just needed Kate to get a little weaker. Then he would strike, not out of hatred, but out of cold calculation. After all, everyone had it coming, especially someone like her. The rains came unexpectedly to Salinas in November, turning the hills green overnight and making the air smell new. It wasn't helpful to the crops, not unless it lasted, and it rarely did. Still, the valley felt different. The war had made the weather feel ominous, as if even the sky had been shaken by distant guns in France. People whispered that the artillery overseas had stirred the clouds over California. Though America had barely entered the war, it was already changing life back home. Flour was rationed. White flour almost impossible to buy unless you took bags of brown flour with it. The rich ate white bread and fed the brown to chickens. The rest made do. Headlines featured General Pershing daily. His stiff uniform, his granite chin, his unreadable expression. He was the face of confidence, though no one knew what he actually thought. The truth was, the war felt closer every day, and victory didn't seem so certain. The country wasn't used to losing. But they also hadn't started truly fighting yet. Millions of young men were still training, waiting. The tension made everything feel suspended, like the world was holding its breath. In Salinas, life moved forward in small ways. Rain softened the dust. Families gathered around radios and newspapers. Food shortages and whispers of the front lines made the war real, even from half a world away. It no longer felt like Europe's problem. It was everyone's. In the Trask home beside Renault's bakery, Adam and Lee pinned a map of the Western Front to the wall. Each day they moved coloured pins across France, tracking the war's shifting lines as if it brought them closer to understanding it. When Mr. Kelly died, Adam was appointed to replace him on the draft board. He was the obvious choice, honourable discharge, respected, and with enough free time from the ice plant to take on the duty. But Adam didn't just accept the job, he carried it heavily. His own memories of war were fragmented and distant, like old, motionless illustrations. The face of a dying man, a pile of burning bodies, the cold call of a bugle. He couldn't remember the emotion, only the shapes. But he remembered enough to know what he was sending boys into. Adam approached the draft board with relentless care. He studied each name on the list. He visited families. He read medical reports like court rulings. Each time he passed a boy into service, he felt like a judge sending someone to die. And because he feared his own compassion might sway him, he grew stricter, painstaking, unbending. He wouldn't let himself be weak. Henry Stanton, his fellow board member, tried to lighten the mood. "You're not carrying the whole war, Adam," he said. "This isn't your burden alone." But Adam couldn't hear it. He was gaunt, pale, and silent. The war hadn't just reached Salinas. It had reached inside him. He worked harder than anyone expected, not for glory, not even for duty, but because he couldn't forgive himself if he made a mistake, if he let a boy go who shouldn't, or kept one back who was ready. The irony was Adam hated what he was doing, and so he did it with more care than anyone else ever would. Late in November, the old madam died, a shadowy, legendary figure in Salinas's underworld. Her funeral was held in complete silence and strict austerity, just as she'd instructed. She lay in an ebony and silver casket surrounded by tall candles. There were no flowers, no prayers, no tears. Her tiny husband sat crouched at her side, unmoving. Over the course of the day, a curious procession of townspeople came to pay their respects, or at least to confirm her passing. Lawyers, clerks, and old men tiptoed to the door, peered in, and left without a word. Her girls came one by one, said nothing, and vanished. Her death marked the end of a dark era in Salinas, a place where sex was more than just a transaction. It was mystery, pain, and sacrifice. The newer houses, Jenny's, Kate's, would continue, but they lacked the same sombre gravity. Hers had been something different, something people feared. Her burial was as minimal as the viewing. Just one hearse and a single car followed her body. The husband, silent, filled the grave himself after the casket was lowered with quiet winches. No ceremony, no one stayed. The wind carried a soft, strange whining across the cemetery as he worked. Joe Valeri, now Kate's enforcer, had been drinking at the Owl with Butch Beavers when they decided to go take a look at the dead woman. Butch was in a hurry. He had cattle to auction. But they paused, out of habit more than mourning. Joe wasn't moved. To him, people were only as important as what they could give or take. Still, even he sensed that something unusual had ended. Not just a life, but a legacy. A haunted, violent corner of Salinas had finally gone quiet. Adam was determined to meet the train. Aaron was coming home from Stanford for Thanksgiving, and Adam wanted to see how the time away had changed him. Cal and Lee tried to talk him out of it, saying Aaron might not even notice anyone at the station in the rush of arrival. But Adam insisted. "He'll be changed," he said. "Experience does that." They all went to the Southern Pacific Depot early. Abra was already there, breathless and nervous. She admitted she couldn't make it to dinner the next day. Her father expected her home, but promised to come as soon as she could. Lee teased her gently about being excited, and she didn't deny it. As they waited, Adam wondered aloud if Aaron would sound different now. "In the East, they say you can tell a Harvard man from a Princeton man," he mused. "I wonder what dialect they speak at Stanford." He was excited. More than he had been in a long time. He'd asked Lee to fill Aaron's room with pears, apples, and muscat grapes, fruit his son loved. When the train finally arrived, Aaron stepped off looking older, sharper and more withdrawn. His smile was tight, his shoulders tense. He embraced Abra, greeted his father politely, and nodded at Cal. Something in his eyes had shifted. It wasn't just that he had grown up. It was that something inside had hardened. Back at the house, the warmth of the welcome couldn't quite reach him. He spoke stiffly, as if rehearsing polite lines. Cal noticed. Lee noticed. Even Abra, who had once felt so close to him, seemed suddenly like a stranger in his presence. Whatever Aaron had found at Stanford, it had pulled him away from them. He wasn't the boy who had left Salinas anymore, and everyone in the room felt the distance, though no one could yet name what had caused it. Kate sat still for hours staring at the wall. Joe Valeri didn't like it. It meant she was thinking, and when Kate was thinking, she was dangerous. He couldn't read her. He didn't know what she might do next. All he could do was wait, observe, and try not to make her snap. The girls in the house sensed something had happened, but none of them knew the truth. Kate wasn't thinking in any orderly way. Her mind drifted like a bat in the dusk, swooping between fragments of memory. She saw Aaron's face, beautiful and blonde, twisted in horror. She heard his voice, not aimed at her but at himself, collapsing from the shock. And she saw Cal leaning in the doorway, laughing with cold satisfaction. She had laughed too, instinctively, trying to protect herself, but it hadn't helped. What did Cal want? Why had he brought his brother to her? What had he hoped to gain from the encounter? Kate couldn't figure it out, and that uncertainty terrified her. She had always been in control, always 2 steps ahead. But now, she couldn't even understand the game. That meant she couldn't win. Her body betrayed her too. Pain crept back into her hands and hips. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. Her arthritis screamed with every movement. Still, she kept everything hidden behind her blank stare. Joe watched her closely, waiting for some sign. He knew she was breaking down, and he was ready to move the moment she did. Kate, once invincible, was unravelling, mentally and physically, and everyone in the house could feel it. The balance of power was shifting. Kate had lived her whole life mastering fear, manipulating others, and surviving through control, but now fear had returned, sharp, real, and nameless. And for the first time, she didn't have a plan. Sheriff Horace Quinn had been a fixture of Monterey County for so long that people spoke his name as if it were part of his title. Tall, broad, and pink-faced with a curled white moustache, he looked every bit the lawman. Over the years, he'd gained not just authority, but a kind of mythic presence. No one questioned his rule. He was the kind of man who knew his county by feel, the roads, the people, the secrets. He didn't waste time chasing dead ends or fighting battles he couldn't win. That's why, when Faye died years ago, Sheriff Quinn suspected Kate immediately. He couldn't prove it, and he didn't try. They were only a couple of whores, he'd say. It wasn't callousness. It was realism. The law, he understood, had limits, and Kate had always played her part, never caused trouble, kept her house clean, and even tipped him off when a wanted man passed through. He had come to respect her in his way. By now, the sheriff knew she was fading. She had grown gaunt, withdrawn, suspicious. People talked about her arthritis, about how she rarely left her room, but Quinn didn't move against her. He figured if her time was coming, it would come without his help. He had seen it before. Power fading, the mighty undone by time, not by guns. Kate had once ruled with absolute control. Now, even the sheriff could see the cracks in her armour. And though he still wore his Stetson with pride and kept his gun close, Quinn wasn't looking for a fight. He was waiting, watching. A sheriff's job wasn't just to act, it was to understand when not to. In the end, it wasn't the law that was going to bring Kate down. It was something older, deeper, something inside her. The winter of 1917 to 1918 cast a long, anxious shadow across Salinas and the rest of the country. The news from Europe was bleak. German forces were unstoppable, French troops were mutinying, and Russia had collapsed into revolution. The Allies seemed broken. American divisions were only just arriving, and the war felt like a distant storm ready to swallow everything. In Salinas, people responded with confusion and despair. Fortune-tellers did brisk business, saloons overflowed, others retreated into personal distractions, escapes from the fear that maybe, just maybe, the war would be lost. History would later remember the flags and parades, the barroom brawls and marching bands. But that winter, no one felt victorious. It felt like the edge of something terrible. Adam Trask wasn't grieving. He was confused. He had stepped down from the draft board quietly and without fuss, but not without inner turmoil. He had worked so hard to be fair and just, to do his duty. But now, with Aron home and distant, something felt off in his world. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong, not just with the war, but with his family. Lee noticed Adam's silence. He tried to talk to him, but Adam was withdrawn. His thoughts circled around Aaron's coldness and Cal's strange energy. Lee, ever the observer, watched and waited. He sensed a storm gathering inside the house, something unspoken, waiting to break. Outside, the world carried on. But inside the Trask home, each man stood at a crossroads, burdened with uncertainty, haunted by choices and afraid of what lay ahead. At school, Abra felt a sense of joy about visiting Lee. She met Cal between classes, who was dressed in his stiff, uncomfortable ROTC uniform. They talked briefly about strawberry tarts Lee was baking, about a small gift Abra had bought for him, a new kind of potato peeler. There was warmth between them, a familiarity that lingered just under the surface. Cal offered to carry her books. Abra gave him a long, searching look that made him squirm, then smiled and walked away. Meanwhile, Adam had slipped into a strange rhythm of frequent naps and foggy awakenings. He often slept during the day, and when he woke, he did so slowly. Lee watched over him closely. That morning, Adam felt unusually good. He even joked about walking down to the draft board. But simple tasks, buttoning his shirt, tying shoes, were now challenges. Lee helped him, patient as always. As Lee dressed him, Adam shared a vivid dream he'd had about his father. The memory seemed to bring him a kind of calm, even as it reminded him how distant and idealised that figure had become over time. Lee listened carefully. He had read the clippings Adam's brother had once sent about their father, stories about Cyrus Trask's military reputation. Lee, ever thoughtful, noted how great men often leave behind distorted legends. But Adam wasn't trying to boast. He was simply trying to hold on to something meaningful as his body and mind continued to fade. The house was quiet, but things were shifting. Abra and Cal were growing closer, Adam was growing weaker, and Lee, standing in the middle of it all, kept everything running, quietly, kindly, without asking for recognition. The winter held on longer than expected, wet, cold, and bitter. People in Salinas joked that the war in France, with its thunderous artillery, had thrown off the weather across the world. The usual signs of spring came late. Even the wild azaleas, so closely tied to the idea of May Day, refused to bloom. Cal had chosen azaleas as the signal for a picnic he wanted to take Abra on. But now the delay in flowers delayed everything else. The Ford sat ready in the shed, newly tuned and waiting for the picnic Cal had planned with Abra. Lee had been asked to prepare sandwiches and kept buying bread every couple of days, expecting the event to happen soon. But the wild azaleas Cal had chosen as the signal still hadn't bloomed. Frustrated, Lee finally asked, "Why don't you just go anyway?" "I can't," Cal replied. "I said we'd wait for the azaleas." To Cal, it wasn't just about a picnic. It was about keeping his word. The flowers had become a symbol, and he wasn't willing to go back on it, no matter how long they took to bloom. Meanwhile, Adam's health showed faint signs of improvement. The numbness in his hand was fading, and he was slowly learning to read again. He told Lee the letters only jumped when he was tired. "I'm glad I didn't get glasses to ruin my eyes," he said. "I knew my eyes were all right." Lee smiled, glad for any progress, no matter how small. Life in the Trask house moved at a cautious, waiting pace. Spring struggled to arrive, just as the people inside the house struggled to emerge from the shadows of the winter. Cal waited for flowers. Adam waited for strength. Lee waited for a moment when everything wouldn't feel so fragile. And somewhere, in the background of it all, the war still raged. But for now, in Salinas, everything was holding its breath. All the lights in the Trask house were on. The front door was ajar and the cold seeped in. Lee sat alone in the sitting room, motionless, with the weight of terrible news on his shoulders. Cal walked in and immediately sensed something was wrong. Lee didn't speak right away, just gestured toward a telegram on the table. "Your brother is dead," he finally said, "and your father's had a stroke." Cal froze, then rushed toward Adam's room. Lee stopped him. Doctors were inside. "Let them do their work," he said quietly. The telegram had come that evening. Lee had to read it to Adam. He couldn't keep it from him. At first, Adam hadn't understood. He repeated the words over and over, as if trying to push them away. And then, all at once, the meaning landed. Something broke inside him. Now Dr. Edwards had come and gone. Dr. Murphy remained, tasked with explaining the damage. "You're the head of the family now," he told Cal. He described the stroke, bleeding in the brain, partial paralysis. The left side of Adam's body was useless. There had been warning signs, smaller strokes Lee had quietly noticed, but no one had wanted to face them. Cal stood there, stunned. The doctor looked at him more gently now. "He might recover a little," he said, "but not fully. And even if he does, he won't ever be quite the same." Everything had changed in a single evening. Aaron was gone, killed in the war he had idealized. Adam was broken, his body failing, his mind slipping. Cal, the son who had lived in the shadows, was now the one left to carry the family forward. Lee sat quietly, absorbing it all. There was nothing left to say, only to endure. Thank you for joining us tonight at the Sleepless Library. We hope this story helped quiet your thoughts and gently carried you into rest.